So, hello everyone, and welcome to the third episode in the Brisbane Writers Festival series of conversations with the incredibly double threat, talented people who both write and illustrate their own books and spin magic with words and images. I'm Sarah Davis. I'm a freelance illustrator and associate art director with Walker Books Australia. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the Darkinjung people as the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm speaking, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and future, and recognise their continuing connection and contribution to this land. And I'd like to extend this respect to any Aboriginal people who are listening today. We're very lucky to have the incomparably talented Sami Bayly with us as our fantastic guest today. And Sami is an incredible scientific illustrator who I think you trained in scientific illustration at Newcastle University. Is that right, Sami?
I do.
A Bachelor of Natural History illustration.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you got it down pat.
And you've gone on to do something incredibly creative with that qualification and produced a series of absolutely stunning encyclopedias. Your first book was an Encyclopedia of Ugly Animals, which won the Children's Indie Book of the Year Award and the Best Designed Children's Non-Fiction Illustrated Book for the Australian Book Design Awards. And in the USA, it won, it was the Forward Reviews Award, wasn't it? A gold winner for juvenile non-fiction, so multi-recognised there. And Honour Award, the list continues, Honour Award for the CBCA Pownell Award, and shortlisted for the ABIA Book of the Year for younger children, and the ABA Booksellers' Choice 2020 Book of the Year Awards. So it really made a splash when it hit the shelves, didn't it? A wonderful reception for your first book, and that must have been an incredible thrill. And then you've gone on to follow that up with an Encyclopedia of Dangerous Animals, which has also been multiply awarded, the Honour Award for the CBCA Eve Pownell Award, shortlisted for the Indie Book of the Year Award as well, and the ABIA Book of the Year for younger children, and the Queensland Literacy Awards for the Children's Book of the Year. And third book, Encyclopedia of Peculiar Pairs,
yes.
Which has come out fairly recently, but is already making an equally big splash, and has been shortlisted for the CBCA Eve Pownell Award and the ABIA Awards again, I understand, for the Book of the Year Younger Children category. Have I missed anything? It's a very long list.
I don't think so. I think you've got it all. It sounds impressive when you say it.
Well, it is impressive. That's why it sounds impressive. And it's just fantastic. Like it's quite unusual, I would imagine, to do a degree like natural history illustration and then to take it in such a tangential direction and to do something so creative and engaging with it. I mean, I think people have this kind of cliched idea that you would do a degree like that and then you might go and illustrate scientific papers or you know do something a little bit drier than what you've done. So
yes.
I think that's a testament to your, you know, the breadth of your sort of creative flair and your imagination and your fascination with all of these creatures. I mean, you've come to us with an entire menagerie of animals at your back and obviously in your head as well.
Yes, and behind me.
yeah. So I think what you've done is you've obviously got this real fascination and love for all the sort of oddballs of the natural world and the complexity of life on Earth and the various creatures that sort of inhabit the ecosystem and you know, so I'd be interested to know where that all started. I mean, have you had that sort of fascination with observing and engaging with nature since you were a child?
I have. I definitely have. And it's funny, until I kind of got to this point where people started to ask, you know, where did that all start? It kind of, I didn't really think about it. And I didn't think how much my childhood and my the way that I had grown up really shaped me and all of my interests and who I am now. So it's interesting actually being forced to think about that stuff. But I grew up, I moved a fair bit, lived in, Katoomba and Queanbeyan and Port Macquarie and Newcastle, and now I'm living in Tamworth. So I've moved around, but I spent most of my young kind of school years in Port Macquarie, and we had a small kind of maybe 5 acres, and mum was obsessed with owning pets. We had lots of pets, usually
She sounds like a fun mum.
Oh yes, yeah, usually not. I think we had almost every kind of typical pet except for a cat. We had dogs, and we had goldfish, and we had birds, we had cows, we had Shetland ponies, miniature ponies, we had donkeys, and Fabio and Frida, and so I just grew up. I remember getting off the bus and walking down, and the bus would pick me up, and you'd hear my donkeys calling, making that cliche Eeyore sound, and everyone kind of look at me, and I'd be like, oh, sorry for that. And so it was just, all different kind of strange animals, and we had the frogs in the trees, we had the antechinus climbing on the walls in the house.
Oh, wonderful.
And it was just so, I think we were surrounded by nature and animals, and I was encouraged to explore that and really admire the unique parts of nature, and we would go to the zoo all of the time, and mum was an artist, or still is an artist, and so she would paint big portraits of my pets, and they would decorate the house, and so I think it was just this perfect kind of combination.
You were steeped in it.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect combination of art and animals, and just seeing that could be something that existed, and how fun that was. And so I just knew from an early age, I was like, okay, I want to be an artist, and I want to paint animals and nature, but how I make that into a full-time paying career that pays the rent, that's the tricky part.
Yes, well, that's where the creativity comes in, I suppose, and the lateral thinking, but having that passion, and that drive must play a huge part in, like, you've gone out and you've made it happen, and you've found ways to make it work. And not only that, but to expand your love and fascination of it, and sort of offer it to the next generation, and get them engaged. I don't know if you could hear, I thought it was really appropriate. You're talking about being surrounded by animals, and the kookaburras are trying to drown you out.
I'll welcome it. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I wonder if there's a sneaky recording. But
yeah, no, I think they're just cheering for you in the background.
They're saying, paint me next.
Yeah. Well, there you go. They're volunteering. But so I think, your work is beautifully accessible for children, and like I was saying, you're really kind of sharing that fascination with them. So down the track, I'd like to look a little bit more about how you kind of shape your books to engage and sort of speak to that audience. But I'd like to stay on your qualification for a moment and just find out a little bit more about that degree, because I think it's not one that a lot of people will be familiar with, but it is really fascinating and very niche, and and that's why I think it's so interesting that you've leveraged it and steered it into such a sort of different direction. So tell us a little bit about what it was like studying scientific illustration, and the sorts of things that you had to do, and maybe, any mentors that you had along the way who kind of fed that, who fueled the fire of your obsession there.
Yeah, well, I am always telling everyone I can at any chance I get about this degree. It felt like it was kind of structured and made for me, because it was this perfect blend of art and science. And so it's called a Bachelor of Natural History Illustration, and it's the only one in the Southern Hemisphere. And it was based in Newcastle at the University of Newcastle. And I was living in Port Macquarie doing my HSC, and which was only about 2.5 hours away from Newcastle.
Sounds very like destiny.
Yeah, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm crazy if I do not try and take this opportunity while I can. And surprisingly, even though it was, I would say 99% art based, it wasn't portfolio entry. And so it was based only on ATAR. And
Right.
and I was a little worried because I loved school, but I didn't, I wasn't fantastic in the courses in school, the subjects that would cause ranks, your ATARs to be ranked up. And so they wasn't playing to plan. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to get in. I think the ATAR for the science illustration course was 70 odd. And I thought, okay, if I try really hard, I can get in there. And I scraped in just. And now I think about it, I look back and I'm like, even if I didn't get that ATAR, it wouldn't have mattered. I could have gone through so many different pathways by going in a certain other degree and then just changing the next year. So
you'd have made it happen somehow.
Yeah, it's definitely it whenever I'm talking to kids, you know, if they're the same, they're more arty brained and they're worried about how ATARs might affect their life. It's such a good example that it doesn't destroy your life, it doesn't shape your life, it's just a part of life that most kids have to go through. But it was this fantastic degree, and I say was because it is in teach out mode, which is heartbreaking to talk about, because
it's tragic.
It was such a unique degree, but basically I think in my first year it started with about 30 people, and there were 30 people from all different walks of life. We had, you know, people leaving just from school like me. We had people who were working normal other jobs and they were doing this as a bit of a side thing, and we had ex-teachers, ex-librarians, retirees. We had people coming from different parts of Australia, all to do this one degree because of how special it was. And so basically they taught us from scratch, you know, whether you were someone who thought of yourself as highly skilled as an artist. I was very young. I think I was maybe just turned 19 or 20. And so I thought I had a base level of skill, but I didn't think of myself as an expert. And they taught us the basics, you know, they taught us from scratch. This is how you use graphite. This is how you use watercolors.
So very technique based and
and it was fantastic because I felt like that is something that everyone wanted to, because you didn't want to be comparing yourself to the person next to you and feeling like you weren't good enough. They really made us feel like we were all had skills in different areas, and we were gonna we would be changing our skills. And I hated watercolors when I first started, and they said, no, you've got to keep trying. And I felt like I couldn't get control with the paintbrush, and I liked sharp pencils because I could get that fine line. But they taught me to be patient, and I learned those skills over 3-4 years.
And having that really, really focused, skills-based technical training is just, I mean, it's invaluable for any artist, and it is actually, you know, quite difficult to sort of access some degrees.
And I think especially, you know, people tell me all the time they like to draw, they like to paint, they like art, but they don't have that talent. And I'm like, talent comes down, you can have an interest, but it comes down to how much you practice. And I was absolutely shocking at watercolor when I first started, and I've done over 300 paintings now. And that's the reason that I have come so far, is because I've done it and I've learned the mistakes, and I'm still learning, and I'm still improving on things that I still believe that I'm not, you know, I don't think I'm an expert, but I'm getting better every time.
You're putting in your 10,000 hours that it takes to be a prodigy.
Exactly. You have to work your butt off.
Absolutely.
But it was just fantastic degree. It was 3 years. I did a 4th of honors because I didn't want to leave. And we could do different degrees inside. So it was mainly, you started with design courses. So they taught us a lot about visual communications, about graphic design and using Photoshop and creating infographics and fonts. And then we learn about, you know, botanical illustration, and we learn about medical illustration, where we were able to go over to the wet lab and draw people that donated their body to science.
That's fascinating.
All of these different, and we had a taxidermy room, which was this huge room that had, you know, a huge albatross hanging from the roof, and all these different taxidermy specimens that were just fantastic. And it was just
often drawing cadavers. That's very much the Leonardo da Vinci school.
It was like we stepped back in time, and it stunk like mothballs, but it was, you didn't want to leave that room because it was like you were somewhere else on Earth. You're in the Natural History Museum, and you could really get in there and see the different creatures and specimens and get up close to be able to learn about their form and their textures to be able to then illustrate them correctly.
That's interesting. And that sort of segues into something that I was very interested to ask you, which is that, you're creating these very, very realistic, very representational images on plain white backgrounds for your 3 encyclopedias. And in some people's hands, that could come across as quite static.
Yep.
It's a very static sort of format. It's, just that one image. And somehow you managed to make these animals very engaging and really breathe life into them. And I mean, that sort of training must have fed into that, where you're actually drawing something that's dead and stuffed, but trying to make it live on the page and look like a convincing animal. I was really interested to ask you about your process of creating those illustrations in your lovely encyclopedias from reference photos, which I don't imagine you've quite managed to. I mean, there are 60 animals in each of the first 2 books, is that right? And 120 in the Encyclopedia of Peculiar Pairs. So that is a menagerie, and I'm sure you haven't quite managed to jet set around the globe, meeting all of them individually in their natural habitat, sadly, especially in COVID. So I'm assuming that Google image search plays a big part in it, and so I'd like to know where you source your reference material, and the process of finding the right materials to allow you to create what you're creating, but also how you go about sort of synthesizing those reference materials, because you obviously don't want to copy a photo. I mean, for one thing, it would be lifeless, and for another thing, there's all sorts of copyright issues. And that sort of thing. So how do you synthesize your reference material to create something entirely new, and how do you breathe life into it?
Yeah, well, that was probably the trickiest part, I would say, of the entire bookmaking experience, because it is that thing. It's like, I can't make up what an animal looks like in my brain without using reference material. I don't have that creativity that I can, especially when you're trying to make something scientifically accurate. You can't just, pick something up off the top of your head and continue from there. So it was this really tricky thing that I have to really thank my degree for helping with that, because from the beginning, that was something that we learned from, is if you can find the creature in real life and use your own photos or sketch from life, because straight away you're going to get rid of that kind of stale, like you were saying, that stale flat image that quite often takes away the life of the creature in the eyes. It kind of, photography is beautiful, and you can make, it's a whole different art form in itself. But I think that's why it's really important to acknowledge that scientific illustration is its own thing. Photography is its own thing. They both add value in their own ways, but they are incredibly, they're so
especially
different.
when you're trying to do, what you're setting out to do, which is to engage people and get them to connect with these animals, especially, since you pick the oddballs of the natural world, you're picking the kids that don't sit at the cool table, and the ones that
the quirky ones,
a little bit peculiar, misfits. What fascinates you so much about them? How did you stumble into glorifying all the ugly animals, and the ones with no social skills, and the ones that might kill you by mistake?
Yes. Well, it all started with the Australian white ibis. So bless the bin chicken. That is the creator of these books, I would have to say. It's thanks to the bin chicken, because I was in my 3rd year of uni, and we were choosing a subject to do our work piece on. And so I chose Australian wetlands, and I wanted to, it was kind of the peak of like when bin chickens were really popular. It was fun to laugh at an ibis and the bin chicken eating a sandwich.
Always fun to laugh at an ibis.
Sifting through the bin. So I thought, this is fantastic, because here is this native, for one, but this native bird that is so bizarre looking, and everyone knows about it. And it's not quite often that you get unusual animals that everyone young people, middle-aged people, old people, kids are starting to, that they know the face. And so I thought this is a fantastic time to kind of step into that market and introduce my own flavor. And so I did an illustration of an ibis, and it's just that it's a plain portrait, just side on white, no background. And I wanted to bring out the beautiful features of that ugly bird. And
Nice.
it has, you know, this really scratchy, kind of strange, long, elongated beak, really wrinkly skin, and it has this like glowing red back of the head that gets brighter when it's time to mate, and these big, beautiful eyes. And I thought, and I did my best to bring out all of that emotion, and using a bit of artistic license, bring out that emotion and passion and kindness of this animal. And I wrote a blurb talking about, you know, why the ibis was important and why we should really do more than, you know, it's fine to have a giggle about it because the animal doesn't actually know you're laughing, it doesn't care. But it's important to also educate yourself on why it's doing what it's doing. And I talked about how its habitats are being cleared and turned into car parks, and that's why they're being pushed into urbanized environments, and that we should, you know, celebrate them for not giving up and just succumbing to you know, extinction or to falling in numbers. This bird has realized that its beak is perfect for reaching down into bins and collecting food. And I think it's sad that that's what it's been forced to do, but it's impressive that it has.
You're really celebrating its tenaciousness and its
exactly,
yeah, flexibility and resourcefulness. And
exactly, and I really wanted to get that across. And so I and back to the reference pictures, you know, we've all seen an ibis, so I had my own reference images as well, and I create this kind of using reference images, videos, my own images, seeing it in real life. I create this Frankenstein's monster kind of version of a creature, and then I use that to then illustrate. So it's got a bit of everything. It's no one's in particular, and it becomes its own creature.
Sort of a gestalt of everything that you've absorbed.
Exactly. And then that's why it's so important to really study an animal every time, so that you are making sure that you're getting it all accurate, so that you're not just, you know, that's the thing. If you're not going straight from a photograph, you have to make sure that the things that you are going from are just as accurate. So it was very complex, and it took up a lot of time. But
I imagine it's the kind of thing that you sort of get your eye in, and it gets easier the more you do it. You sort of you know, become a whole lot more sort of competent at just that fusion.
Yeah, and you stop relying on the images itself, and you start really using your prior experience and your illustration skills on, you know, birds and the feather texture and everything that you've learned in the past 120, you start using for the future ones. So I've noticed, and I've seen myself change, and my artistic skills really develop and evolve over the 3 books and into this 4th one. And it's been even though it's been only 3 or 4 years, I can notice a huge difference myself.
And that sort of ties in nicely with the transition from your degree into the books, and how you managed to kind of make that shift. Was that destiny stepping in as well, or did you have to go out and hustle? Or
not really. No. So it's funny, people ask me often, you know, I would love some hints and maybe tips into stepping into the publishing industry and making books, and I'm like, I can give you as many tips as I possibly can, but the thing that kind of caused me to step in was luck, I would have to say, and I think sometimes you create your own luck. But talking about that ibis illustration, I had entered that into a competition with the Australian Museum, and it was a scientific illustration scholarship to celebrate the Scott sisters. And if you know them, you know them. If you don't, you should research them.
I was going to nod wisely and pretend, but no, do enlighten me.
They're 2 sisters that lived a couple hundred years ago, and they lived at Ash Island in Newcastle, and they were basically the pioneers for female scientific illustrators in Australia. And they pretty much in the time where it was definitely not encouraged for females to go to university. And they had a supportive father who said, I'm going to teach you because you can't get into this uni. And he was an entomologist who studied insects and butterflies and moths. And he basically taught them everything that they needed to know about that sort of side of things. And then he helped them illustrate. And so they became these fantastic illustrators, and they would use a single hairbrush to create these intricate illustrations. And you really should look it up after. They were...
I will.
Yep.
Is there any way you can go and see the originals?
They, at the Australian Museum, they have every now and then, I think, I'm not sure how often they bring them back, but they do exhibit them, and it is fantastic.
I'll keep an eye out for that, because it must be incredible to see them in the flesh and actually see the brush strokes and the...
Yeah, and they're not huge. I think most of them might be A3, maybe a couple bigger, some smaller, but you can get up close and you can see how much that they, and this is during the time where they can't use photographs, obviously.
Absolutely.
So they're using, you know, specimens, and that's why specimens are so important, and scientific illustration was so important during that time, because people were able to learn about the moths and butterflies and that life cycle, and seeing them and seeing that kind of that transition into their life. And it was this huge area that really wasn't covered before, and they covered it and they did amazing. But it wasn't really until after they had died that their skills were truly recognized and appreciated. And I think it was then sold to certain museums that then were able to showcase it. And so now it's this thing that it was fantastic. And so I got to go to those locations where they grew up and that they painted, because it was right near my uni. And then
wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. And so I was sitting there feeling like, yeah, this is fantastic. These are the women that made it possible for me to do what I'm doing right now.
It's a lovely circularity to that, isn't there?
Yeah. And so it was a scholarship at the Australian Museum that was celebrating them. I think it had been a certain amount of years before it was to celebrate them. And so I entered it, and I ended up being the co-winner with another woman from my degree. And so they put my Ibis illustration along with a couple others in the paper that I had entered into the Sydney Morning Herald, and did a bit of a blurb about, you know, the new generation of scientific illustrators and the new generation of Scott sisters. And I was thinking, like, yeah, this is huge, you know, to even compare that in the slightest form was massive for me. And then it just so happened that in Sydney at Hachette Publishing, that the head of children's publishing was reading, Jean Marie, she was reading the newspaper and saw my illustration of the Ibis and my blurb about why that they're ugly, but we should appreciate them and see their true inner beauty. And she contacted me and said, do you want to make a kid's book on ugly animals?
Wow.
Knowing none of my writing skills or my work ethic. And she took a chance, and thank God she did, because that's why I'm here now.
Gosh, so you must have built quite an amazing relationship with her over the course of these 3 books, because they're intense books. I mean, they're incredibly content heavy, you know, facts based, obviously. So, you know, you need a high degree of accuracy, and I imagine there's a, you know, pretty rigorous editorial process that goes into it. And this is the first book that you've written, and you're really throwing yourself in the deep end. So you must have had a lot of trust in her. And I mean, tell us what that back and forth was like in your relationship with your publisher, and how you worked together to kind of, you know, create this trilogy.
It was wonderful. And then I keep thinking to myself, I'm so lucky that this was my entry into the book world, because I know that some people can have a different kind of entry and it might burn them, and it might really put them off and set them back. And I just keep thinking, like, this is fantastic that this was my entry, and it was also positive. Everyone at Hachette has always been so happy with me to keep that creative control, and never once did they step in and tell me what to do or tell me which animals to choose. They left that up to me.
Met you where you were at and worked with.
Yeah. And they trusted my creative control, and I think that was, even from the beginning when they didn't really know much of me, that really put a lot of kind of faith in myself, because I thought, well, they believe in me, so I must be able to do it. And I think if I didn't have that, I would have second guessed every step of the way through myself. And I was already, very stressed because I decided for some reason to also do honors while I was doing this
Oh
book.
my goodness.
Yes, I did.
By halves.
I decided that because I didn't want to leave uni. And when you mentioned mentors, my lecturers were the best people that could have kind of been with me through those steps. I had Andrew Howes, who's this fantastic artist on his own, and giving me, transferring all of those skills that he had learned and techniques, and Trevor Weeks, this fantastic, hilarious, talented man who was only there during my first year, but he was such an important role, and Bernadette, and all of these different people who were incredibly important to my growth. And it was just, they were able to help me while I was doing the book, and say, yeah, these, we can help you with this part, we can help you with this part, and this is how I would imagine an illustration might look better as well.
Valuable, isn't it? So you sort of had that editorial input from Hachette, and then almost art direction from your lecturers and your mentors at university.
And it fell perfectly. And so I did, during that year, I did 30 of the illustrations. And then when the honours year had finished, it was probably around November. From November to around February to March, I did the other 30. And I crammed it all in, but I managed to do it, and it was fantastic. And I pretty much during that year, I had only met with Jean Marie at Hachette maybe once or twice. Everything else was over email, and so and maybe the occasional phone call, but this was really before we were using Zoom often. So everything was email, and it taught me how to, because I was just coming straight from uni, I didn't really know how to professionally email. It taught me as well, this is how you, this is what you should be doing. And it was another kick into my professional realm that was incredibly helpful, and everything was perfect. And then I scanned all the originals, sent them through, and I worked closely with the editors, Astrid Hicks, and I think it was Daniel New for the cover of Ugly Animals. And we were able to create this thing that everyone was happy with. There was no
the look of the series is absolutely stunning, isn't it? I think the designers did an incredible job.
I think it makes, it really made it.
Yeah, very, very dynamic, and lots of visual impact, and a real identity. Like the series feels beautiful too, like it's, and actually that was something I was interested to ask you too, like given that the audiences for this book, the kids that you're writing for, they've got Google image search and a Wikipedia page on each animal at the tips of their fingers. So what do you think the advantages of presenting them in this encyclopedia format, which is, it's going back to the old school days, isn't it? And
it's quite traditional.
Yeah, do you think the physicality of the book and the craft and care that's gone into creating these books is obvious? Do you think that helps engage them and creates a sense of reverence around the animals that you're featuring? What do you think the advantage is?
I think it was funny when I was making it, I kept kind of thinking, I want this book to be something that I would have loved to read as a kid. And I would still love to read it now. And so I had in the back of my mind, I had my childhood self thinking, I want this to be something that isn't a huge wall of text, because I have always struggled with reading, big walls of text. I've always felt that I had undiagnosed dyslexia somewhere, and because I've always struggled with my spelling, my sentence structure, always through high school and primary school, and it really impacted me. And so I thought, I want to make this for kids who are like me, where they want to learn, they want to read, but to make it a bit more accessible. And so that's why it was so important that I created this kind of keepsake, beautiful artwork, a beautiful book, like a coffee table book.
Yeah, it's just a lovely object.
Something beautiful and traditional, but still informative, and not just something that you look at, that you can decide to just look, but you can also get in and read and find the information straight away that you want to know. And that's the thing. A lot of the kids, when I do school workshops, they go, oh yes, I know this fact, I know this. And so it's not like all this stuff is completely new to them. It's just in a, well, in an accurate way, because we know that Wikipedia isn't always accurate. And so it's giving them facts straight up that are accurate. And also it's just getting across that other important information that I think quite often gets missed in animal books for kids, because they think that kids, you know, we shouldn't talk about the conservation status and population of animals because it can depress kids. I don't think that's true. Yeah, I think that kids want to know, they deserve to know, and we should be explaining to people of all ages why it's important to look after animals before they do disappear, to stop them from disappearing. And so I really felt it was important to include conservation status as a subheading in every page for every single book, talking about whether it was endangered, critically endangered, of least concern, any of the other categories, and explaining in a straight up, a factual way, this is why this species might be critically endangered, whether it's we're clearing the habitat to create palm plantations, we are, you know, potentially where it's poachers, it could be we're using it for their horns or their flesh or anything like that, and teach kids that this is the reality, but it's not something to become upset about, it's something to take action about.
So you're trying to do it in a way that empowers them and shows them that there are, you know, ways that they can engage with the world and make a difference. And
Exactly.
I actually, this is an area that I was, you know, hoping that we could talk about, because, you know, obviously you're doing this lovely thing where you're fostering a fascination with these creatures, but also showing that intersection between the human world and the animal worlds and how they've impacted each other, and how you know, we've had a detrimental effect on these animals, but how we can also you know, preserve and cherish them. And I see, to add to your long list of awards, you've received a highly commended, in the, if I get this right, the Community Educator of the Year Award for the Australian Association for Environmental Education.
Yeah, that was only a recent one. That was
a lovely sort of trophy to add to your list. And I imagine that's one that's very near and dear to your heart, because that's very close to, you know, what is obviously a driving force for you in creating these books in the first place. So it must be nice to have that recognized and to feel like people sense that what you're doing is making a difference and having an impact.
Yeah, it was really important, I think, because before that, the awards that the book were getting were quite often the visual side, and you know, the design and the artworks and the book as a whole. But to be recognized for the message behind the words was really important for me, because I had never seen myself
probably the most important thing.
Yeah, I'd never seen myself as an author, only you know, the illustrator. And while I've done both, it was never something that I felt was my strong point. And to feel and realize that other people, adults, kids especially, were reading the book and learning the important side of how to care for the environment and the animals, and why we should appreciate unique animals, that was massive for me. And I have learned that, you know, one of the best parts of my job is getting to go around to different schools and do school workshops, and I have made sure I try and do as many as I can, because it is absolutely so much fun. I usually visit primary schools, and I feel like it's the perfect ages to talk about this stuff, because they are eager to learn, they are hungry for knowledge, especially about animals and the weird facts of nature. And I love talking to kids because they teach me things. They're always, you know, I love to ask a question, why do you think it looks the way it does? And you bring up the most bizarre looking creature you can think of, and then they're straight away, it's because this because that, and their theories, you know, whether they're actually what scientists say or not, doesn't matter.
You're incredibly
it's showing that they're critically thinking about nature and about how evolution works, and about how humans' impacts on nature can be really important. And that part has been something that has been the most rewarding, I would think, and getting recognized for that award, about that kind of Community Educator of the Year.
Yeah, that's huge.
It was huge, and it just kind of motivated me more to realize that school workshops and school visits that I'm doing and the community work is incredibly important, and to
It's
never
a huge part of what you're about and what you're setting out to do.
definitely.
And I understand that you actually sent copies of your first two books to David Attenborough.
Of course.
Of course. As you
I
would.
did. I wonder if you can see it. Oh yeah, you can see just above my spider here.
Is that the
over
framed
here.
letter?
Yes, so this is
Brilliant.
my letter that I got back. I got two back. The other one's on the resting down. But basically, I thought it was just towards the end of 2019, I think, and I just Ugly Animals had just been published, and I had a big list on my phone of influential people and inspirational people that I admired and wanted my book to reach. Whether they read it or not was another thing. I had probably thought that was, you know, not going to happen, but I wanted to try to actually get across to my piece of work to those.
Yeah, well, you're really following in their footsteps too. I
Exactly.
mean, you know, what you're doing with your 3 encyclopedias, you know, David Attenborough's done for millions, you know, for decades. And
yep,
yeah,
exactly right. And I wanted to show that, you know, they have been, you know, David Attenborough and Jane Goodall have been huge inspirations, and they are, you know, this is what they've inspired. This work has been inspired by people like them, and I'm hopefully inspiring, you know, younger people again to
oh, you absolutely will be. Yeah, no doubt about it.
And
Yeah.
so I basically I wrote a little message in Ugly Animals to both of them separately. Thank you for, you know, I basically wrote very adoring messages saying how much I loved them growing up and still today, and how important they were, and that I hope they enjoyed it. And I sent them off. I managed to get their addresses pretty easily. It's not hard if you're wanting to do it. And so I was very surprised. In about 3 months, I think, or maybe less, I got some snail mail back from David Attenborough, and it basically
beyond anything you would have hoped for.
Oh, it was huge. I remember reading it because it was raining, and I was getting this letter out of my mailbox, not really caring if it got wet. And it said like Royal Mail. It was very official looking envelope. And I was like, that's odd. That's not mail you get every day. And I was thinking, like, is it a fine? Did I get a traffic fine?
In finding me?
Yeah. I was like, what is this? And then I read it, and it was handwritten. And so he's an older man now, and it was a bit tricky to read, but not quite legible. And so I sat there trying to decipher what it said for a good 10 minutes. My partner was looking over me being like, and we're both trying to read it, and it was like, I see if I can remember off the top of my head. So, dear Sami Bayly, thank you for sending me a copy of Ugly Animals. In truth, I don't think any animal is ugly, at least in the eyes of its mate.
Aww.
And he said, I wish you the best with the book. Kind regards, David Attenborough. And I could have passed out and died there and then. It was huge, and I went and straight away got it framed, and
that's one of those moments that you're just going to hold close to your heart for the rest of your life.
Exactly. It stayed with me in my office, even though I've moved a few times. It stayed in my office every time, and I got an email reply from Jane Goodall's team saying that, because this is just when COVID kind of started,
right.
And they said, you know, you've sent it to a US address. She's not able to travel due to COVID, but we've kept it in her personal library, and it'll be here for when she gets here. And they were lovely, really
that's
open.
really nice that they took the time to do that.
It was really important to me that, like, how easy is it to not reply for both of them?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm sure they get a lot of emails. I'm sure they get a lot of texts, a lot of letters, and so I thought that made it even more special. And
that's a real reflection of who they are too.
Exactly.
Nice to know that your heroes are as, you know, stand up and as you hope that they are.
It's so easily could have gone the opposite way, but it just shows that they are fantastic people. And I'm always telling kids, you know, reach out to people that you admire and your heroes or your inspirations, because chances are they probably will see it, and chances are that they might reply, and that might make your entire life. So it's worth the risk. Yeah.
Well, if we go back to you know, children for a moment, and your work with them, and how how you try and speak to them as an audience and reach them. Like you're dealing with some quite difficult scientific concepts, and in your writing you're not really shy of using, you know, complex scientific terms like sexual dimorphism or you know, whatever else. And but you also seem to be able to manage to use the terms and then break them down for your readers in a way that's not, you know, condescending and doesn't break the rhythm of your writing, which I think you know, must be quite a difficult balance to strike, to sort of, you know, be accurate, communicate complex ideas, but also keep it, you know, easily digestible. And like you were saying, the layout that you've chosen for the books kind of helps with that as well. Like you've broken it into, like, each page has that beautiful, you know, single illustration of an animal, gloriously done, huge impact, and then there's the sort of information page with all the facts and also little infographics that you've done as well, little black and white infographics. So how easy did you find it to strike that balance? Did you have to kind of ease into it? Did it take a while to sort of fine tune it? Or
well, it was honestly easier at the start, because it was when I was still creating that base level of information and education on the animals for myself, because I was, you know, out of all of the books, there was only a very tiny portion that I knew of the animals and the information beforehand. Pretty much as I went, I was learning. And so it was interesting and quite easy, or easier at the start, to make sure that every time I'm writing something in that book about the animals, that I'm further explaining and breaking down what that means to the kids, because quite often I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what sexual dimorphism, sexual monomorphism. I didn't know that they were terms, and so I was learning myself, and so I wanted to make sure that.
Sorry to interrupt, but I guess that is an interesting point, because I mean, you're not a biologist, are you?
No.
You're a biologist. I mean, you are coming at it from the point of view of an artist, which makes you essentially a scientific layman. So you are in the same position as your audience.
Exactly. And I think that made the difference, that I'm coming from, while I enjoy reading about animals, I'm not a scientist. I'm a scientific illustrator, and that's very different, you know, very different stuff. And so I was hungry to learn, and everything that I learned, I was like, I have to write this, I have to include this, because this is fantastic. But I have to make sure that it makes sense to me, because if it doesn't make sense to me, I'm just, you know, the average person, then it's not going to make sense to another average person, and it's not going to make sense to kids who are still learning about different words and terms. And so I made sure that, you know, I thought we could have a glossary, but I thought, you know, I don't want the few kids that go, I'm not going to flick to the glossary and actually read what that means. I want them to make sure that they're not missing out on what a certain word means. So I want to make sure that instead of writing, you know, sexually dimorphic, that that you're and then not saying anything after, they're going, what the hell does that mean? You know, that they're going, yep, okay, it means that the male and female look different, and, you know, monomorphic, they look the same, you can't tell the difference. And so I wanted to make sure that was a big part of the book. I wanted to, and then coming to the next books, Dangerous and then Peculiar, it was going and seeing and visiting the kids at schools and libraries and other places in the community, where I was realizing these kids don't need me to dumb stuff down. Like, you know, these kids are smart. These are
not to underestimate them. They have big ideas.
Exactly. So many people sometimes think, you know, kids, they're not going to know what that means, or they're not going to, if there's a big word there, then it's not good for the kid to look at it and not understand it. It's like,
they're hardwired to be hungry to find out what that means. And
they have internet, they go, okay, what does this word mean if it's not explained? And they're quick, or they ask their family, what does this mean? The family, they look it up together. And quite often kids also say, they ask me a question. If I don't know the answer, I say, you know, I'm not sure, you know, let's look at it together. Let's find out together. If it's a question that scientists or you know, researchers haven't quite discovered the answer yet, there's many that's
interesting in and of itself, isn't it?
We still don't know so many things about so many animals and plants, and I say, you know, this goes to show that it's okay to not know everything and to not know the answer, because it shows that we're continuing to learn and to find out information, and let's make it exciting and a rewarding thing, not something to be embarrassed about.
And making it a sort of lifelong process rather than
exactly something that you will never stop doing. And it's
endless process, voyage of discovery.
Exactly. And so especially with the boys, they love sci-fi, books. They love the fantasy element of monsters and strange looking beasts. And it's like, I'm trying to introduce to kids, boys, girls, everyone else, that they can,
right on your back doorstep.
that these are real creatures that exist while we're alive today, which makes it even more exciting.
As bizarre as something that you might find in a sci-fi movie.
Exactly. And it is right here. It is real. Let me tell you all of this interesting stuff that I have to share. And that's, they usually go off when I talk about the funny poo facts and the gross stories. It's the peak.
Actually, I mean, like, you're not afraid at all to shy away from the gross and the gruesome.
Oh no,
right? Disgusting. Like, there's so many things in there that just make you go, oh, really?
Yeah, especially with the peculiar pairs. I wanted to talk about parasites. And now when I go to school, I make a point that all I do is tell them about the strange parasitic pairs in nature and the gross facts.
The grosser the better.
Yeah, and we know about life cycles.
Was there? Can you think of any examples where you were starting to do something, then you were like, oh, I really better pull back on this. Maybe I should tone it down. Maybe I should just.
Yes, there are many, but one in particular is. See if I can find it quickly while I'm chatting. There in the Peculiar Pairs book, there's almost a 3 partnership between. We have a beautiful cat and we have a rat, and you go, okay, that's cute. That's an odd pair, but it actually involves a third party. It is a mind controlling parasite, and that parasite it's a life cycle, but eventually it gets into the cat's droppings and into the kitty litter and tiny. And so quite often when rats are running around this kitty litter, or the urine or the feces of the cat, it's absorbing it onto its hands, its feet, and then it's licking its hands and feet and gets into its system. And that parasite works its way up into the brain of the rat, and it basically messes with the fear receptors of the rat and says, okay, Mr. Rat, I want you to walk on up to this cat, and because that cat is actually a giant rat that wants to mate with you, and the rat is full, it has no choice, and it's basically mind control.
So the rat basically becomes the worst pickup artist ever.
It does. It goes there, goes hello, and then it gets. So it's a very short end to the rat, and it's unfortunate because it is the middleman, but there's not much you can do, and so and then in that cat, it then goes into the feces again, and then it's able to reproduce inside of the digestive system in the cat. So that's why it needs to do that kind of cycle. But in that cat poo and in the kitty litter, it can actually it can go into humans, and it can cause quite severe consequences in pregnant women. And so that's why quite often, if you've ever heard, if you're pregnant or
litter box.
You shouldn't go near litter box. You shouldn't really even go near cats, which I'm sure is hard to do. A lot of people love cats, and so because it can cause birth defects.
Brain lesions, things like that.
I really wanted to talk about that, but I had to be very careful because it's a heavy topic, and so I wanted to make it interesting, informative, not leave anything out, but not scare anyone.
I can add an interesting fact about toxoplasmosis, because I found out the other day that 30% of people are infected by it, and they think it actually makes you a lot more kind of mellow and easygoing.
Well, so, maybe we all need it.
Really relaxed, unstressed people, chances are they've got that brain parasite that's in there going, everything's fine, walk up to the cat, it'll be okay.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I read something the other day about a pork worm, which is like a tapeworm that's found in pigs, and how it managed to get into a tiger, And that tiger was then infected, and it made the tiger mellow and not scared of humans. And so it went into this public area with all these humans. There's this wild tiger, and they're going, what is wrong? There's something not quite right. And it was because it was infected with this thing that changed it and made it not scared.
We think we're masters of our own destiny, but there's little tiny agents out there.
Exactly. We don't even know that they're there. So I think, I could make a whole book on just parasites.
I mean, look at us. We just went down a complete rabbit hole there.
Exactly.
Tell me more. This is the effect
Exactly.
you have on people.
Yeah. And I think, kids especially, because it's not quite often that in school they're allowed to talk about poo and mind controlling zombies and everything like that. So when you make it something that they're allowed to do, and it's fun and it's funny, but it's educational, then it's like win.
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant. And I wanted to, just from an artistic point of view, I'm really fascinated we steer it in another direction entirely now. I'm really fascinated to know a little bit more about your technique and, how you actually create your amazing works. Because, I mean, the books are so meticulous and so beautifully presented, and your work is, very detailed and pristine. And, I'd assume you've got quite a what am I trying to say? Methodical. That's the word. A methodical way of approaching, creating a book and the whole workflow. And, I mean, you must have to keep everything pretty clean to actually create these impeccable paintings that you produce as well. So can you just talk us through the process of maybe just creating a painting?
Yeah, well, it's something that is, you need a lot of patience, and surprisingly I don't find myself as a person with a lot of patience. So I don't know, I think it's only in one tiny area in my life that I am forced to have patience. But I have actually my paint brushes here, so it might be interesting to show you the kind of different ones I use and why they're so important, because I use watercolors. If you or anyone out there listening uses watercolors, you know how frustrating they can be. Yes, they're very finicky, and it is quite painstaking sometimes. And so when I use all of the illustrations from my book artworks are done at A3 size. And so I try to do them as big as I possibly can to fit in as much details as I possibly can. Even though they're being shrunk down to, say, close to A4, I still want to make sure that they are as detailed as possible. So I usually use a wet on wet technique. And if you are familiar with watercolor, you know that it's basically you get your watercolor paper, which has to be quite thick, otherwise it will buckle quite heavily with the water. And you're using say this one's good because it's quite big, quite a big brush.
And do you stretch your paper first?
I don't. I should. There you go. I'm not patient enough for that.
It's one of those things that everyone skips if they can.
It is. And then you regret having to do it at the end because it can ruin it. So usually I go, and you can see, any of the ones behind me, they haven't been stretched, the smaller ones up there. Right. But it's something that I go.
Are you having to with your new book that you're working on now, where you're doing a lot of backgrounds and things?
Well, that's what I've been doing. I've been separating them. So I've been painting the background separately to the main piece of work, so that I can, and it does come down to scanning. And whenever you're scanning, you can luckily get rid of any kind of waves in the paper or any
so you go in and retouch in Photoshop.
Yeah, that's really important, because quite often you can drop a blob of paint where it shouldn't be, and quickly get rid of that. And but basically you just wet the paper with clear water, and then you add your pigment. So you add your paint with, like, say if you want to cover a wide area with a big brush, and then it flows without showing a lot of paintbrush strokes. It shows and covers an area really cleanly and smoothly. So it's good for those base levels if you're wanting to do, say, a mammal where, or maybe an amphibian might be a better example, where it's quite smooth and it is one kind of texture. That would be a fantastic way, that wet on wet technique.
And then you get that lovely organic sort of those organic textures that are unexpected, and those happy accidents,
Yes,
the way that it all flows.
exactly. And that's the thing with watercolor, you can't undo, you can't go back. And
No
so when you
control
get
Z.
those, yeah, no, yes, exactly. No, I've done that a few times when I was drawing and I was using Photoshop too much, and I've done a mistake with actual pencil, and I've gone to,
and then you're looking for the button and going, oh
yeah,
no,
and you're like, oh,
yeah.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that if you do have a happy accident, it is the best day ever, because it's quite often that they're not happy accidents, they're just accidents, and you have to kind of work around. And I don't have the patience to start again, so I usually just embrace it, and all of my artworks look quite horrible until that last bit where you're adding those fine details.
Go through an awkward adolescence.
Exactly. I say it's the ugly stage, and with ugly animals, it's ugly throughout. But
when you really hope no one wants you to show it to them.
Exactly. So I'll get one of my small brushes. This one here is quite small. You probably see it better on the background actually. That here is what I would use for all of the details at the end. So little stray hairs, little details if I'm doing an eye up close, and in the pupil or the iris, and this is probably my most important one, because that does make a big difference. And you can use a wet on dry technique, which is where you use your wet brush with paint on it to apply to the dry paper, and that usually helps with building tones, building shadows, building depth. And something else that I like to remind people is no rules when it comes to art, of course, and I think it's useful when you hear people talk about what they do, because you can go, oh yeah, I'll try that, or you go, no, I don't like that. You take what you want, you get rid of everything you don't like, it doesn't matter. But something I found really makes a big difference is if you're wanting to create shadows, ditch the black, don't even buy black paint, don't do it, create blacks. If you think something it's black, you're probably not looking at it as deeply, because it's most likely a dark blue. It's probably got purples, it's probably got greens and browns and reds, and that all together, you can mix them and it creates a dark color.
That's actually one of the things I think that gives your work that beautiful life that we were talking about, and moves it out of that sort of photographic, it gives it that sort of luminosity and vibrancy.
I think, Anna, it kind of brings out some of that life, and it does add, it's still a bit of artistic license, but it does, it creates, that it makes the difference between a flat image to a non-flat image that has a bit more oomph behind it,
and it kind of shines off the page and looks like it's under natural light, and you're actually looking at it in the real world rather than
exactly. And get rid of the browns. If you think something's just brown, I think a good a good activity is to look at your hand and your skin tone, and to really see it's not just one color. It is so many colors all put together. Find every color you can, and then make a little swatch, and then write all of those colors that you can spot. I can see already there's blues, there's greens, there's orange, there's yellows, there's pinks, and there's some purples, and all of that together makes up my skin tone, and someone else's is going to be different entirely. And that's so important to learning about color scheme.
And that's part of that observation, and that kind of taking joy in the tiny details of the everyday world and of reality. And you're obviously very good at honing in and just kind of reveling in the small details and the textures, and your work is full of texture and intricacy, and the way you render fur and feathers, and it's not just that you're good at it, it's like you're really enjoying it, like it's a real celebration of those textures and those colors, and like you were saying with your Ibis portrait, that you're really bringing out all of those glorious colors in the eyes, and the mating spot on the back of the head. It's just and you can even do it with your own hand, just encouraging people to actually notice these details and these small intricacies, and just kind of celebrate the beauty of what's around them. It's a really, really special thing to do.
It is all of those small things that once put together, they do make a big difference. And that's I think if you skip all of those small details and all of that the small stuff, that, and same with, you know, that's a life lesson in general. If you skip the small stuff, it's not rewarding. And
Yeah.
I always think that you can sense by looking at a piece of work if that person is passionate about it or not, because it comes through in whether it's the writing, the art, it does reflect. And if you're passionate about something, find your niche, because that is, you know, that is where you're going to excel.
Yeah, that's invaluable advice. And I mean, you've obviously found yours, and you're heading for. What's next in this? Where's this incredible journey taking you next? What are you working on now?
Oh, I am just at the finish line of my fourth book, so I am in party mode. It's and I think quite often, unless you're an author and illustrator, you don't quite recognize how exhausting that can be. It is
all consuming.
Yeah, you put your whole entire self into this sort of stuff, and so without releasing too much information, it'll be all come out soon, but I'm changing. We're going to put the Illustrated Encyclopedias on hold for now. Maybe revisit it in the future, but for now, yes, I don't think I can ever get rid of them completely. They were too special, but we're going to try something different. So we're going down the picture book route with a playful combination of non-fiction and fiction, and looking at the interesting stories, and you know, maybe they are from the word of mouth of certain creatures, finding out, yes, that's following that same thing where you're learning about an animal and why its features are so unique and important, but and
right from the tardigrade's mouth, so
exactly. And making it more accessible in a way to younger kids whose parents might not want to read a big full 128 page book. Maybe they want to read
have a bedtime story, and
exactly a short story they can cover. It has a message in a way, and just exploring that. So I'm really excited.
I can't wait to see what you're up next. It's going to be brilliant. Okay, and I'll just end with a question slightly out of left field. When you say you're not a patient person, but I imagine that to create the type of work that you do, you would really need to lose yourself in it. And there must be moments where you're just completely immersed in the flow of what you're doing. And the outside world kind of recedes, and you're there, painting the feathers on that ibis. So when you're in that moment, if the inside of your head was a physical space and you could go and walk around in it, what would it look like? What sort of space would you be standing in?
Oh, that's a good one. It's funny because when you sort of talk about these things, I almost get on like an autopilot sort of thing where while I'm illustrating, very rarely do I illustrate with nothing going on around me, because my brain, I think, needs to have something going on all the time. So quite often I have the TV in the background. I have my YouTube playing some documentary, or Netflix telling me some crime documentary, or I have TikTok on live, like listening to a live person talk, just go through their morning routine. And so I think it would be this really chaotic place where it's maybe, you're hearing something, 5 things playing at once, and you're looking at mayhem, but there is a calm in there, because that, believe it or not, makes me calm. So whether I have some sort of ADHD built into me somewhere that I'm yet to discover, that
that stimulus to produce that dopamine.
Yeah, but I think it would make sense, because I can't quite focus when there's not a lot of stuff going on.
Oh, that is fascinating, because you would never think that, from the work that comes out the other end of that process.
Yeah, I think I get, if it's too quiet, I'm stuck with my own thoughts, and I become too engrossed in what I'm doing or what I'm thinking, and I end up psyching myself out. And so I kind of need something where I'm focusing on something else than what I'm doing, which is strange.
A little bit fragmented, so that you can just be on autopilot and get it done.
Yeah, and it also pays off, because the amount of hours that I put into every book, the amount of videos I've watched. I probably should be learning a language or listening to something productive, but it ends up being silly YouTube videos that probably offer me nothing. But I can
actually totally relate.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds
It's a lot of
very
hours wasted, but not in a way.
good. Well, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure we're all going to be on tenterhooks waiting for this next book, which is a new direction for you to be coming out. It'll be interesting to see where it all goes from here. And yeah, it's just really satisfying to watch your meteoric rise, really, because it has just basically been just a few years since you graduated.
It has.
And
It's been about 4 or 5 years. Yeah.
yeah, and I think a lot of people would be quite envious of not just the fact that you've I'm not envious in a bad way, admiring. That's probably a better word, of the fact that you've taken your passion, you've made such a success of it, you've taken it in such an interesting direction. You've worked so hard to achieve what you've achieved, obviously, but you're really like living your own dream and being very true to what's important to you. So it's very inspiring to talk to you about.
Thank you. I think I was at a point where I was kind of thinking, I'm gonna make this happen. It's gonna happen regardless of how I get there or when I get there. And it's going to happen, and I'm just shocked that it happened so soon. So I knew that I was going to do it.
And I'm sure it will continue to happen for you.
I hope so. This might be my peak, who knows.
Yeah. So thanks so much, Sami. It's been a delight.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.